Yeah, welcome everyone. Happy New Year. I can't believe I'm saying that on the 25th of January, but it is a Happy New Year for the Myths of Sport Coaching webinar viewers. So thanks for joining us tonight. Unfortunately, Jen's not with us. She's got an important job with West Ham this evening. West Ham are in the FA Cup quarterfinals, so good luck to Jen, although they are playing Liverpool, so I need to be careful what I say there. And yeah, thanks again for joining us, everyone. So we've got Dr. Mark Partington with us tonight from Edge Hill University. Mark, I'll let Mark introduce himself in more detail. He's going to give you a little bit of a background. But Mark's going to talk about his myth around questioning. So from my kind of work within coach education, I know that we kind of went through this whole fashion or boom of we must use questioning within our coaching, and this idea that questioning does lead to learning. I think a lot of people on tonight are coaches, and I'm sure that they will be reflecting throughout this session around if they are using questioning, how often do they use it, what types of questions do they ask, and hopefully by the end of this session it leaves you reflecting a little bit more on why you use questioning, and if you're using the right types, if you should be using questioning at all. And kind of Mark's going to unpick the literature. If you haven't already kind of picked up a copy of the book and read Mark's chapter, I'll put a link in the chat as we go. Just a bit of kind of housekeeping, if we can keep ourselves on mute just for the time being. Mark's probably going to speak for around 20 to 30 minutes. Please do put questions in the chat. I will keep an eye on them, and we will have at least 20 minutes at the end of this session for some nice discussion. And if anyone's got any thoughts, I'm sure Mark will pose questions throughout the session. So yeah, thanks again, Mark, for joining us tonight. Thanks in advance for giving us your time. I'll hand over to you now, and hope everyone enjoys the session tonight.
Thanks, Amy. Yeah, good evening to everyone. I suppose firstly, thank you to Amy and Jen for inviting me to do this webinar. And the book chapter back in 2021, it seems a long time ago, lockdown then. But yeah, hopefully, like Amy says, you can get something out of this this webinar. I tried to cater it for sort of everyone who I thought would be on the call. So I'm going to try and present some of the literature, discuss some of the literature in this area, but also consider some practical implications or recommendations. And like Amy said, it'd be really nice to hear some of your thoughts and have some discussions at the end. Hopefully throughout the presentation, if it does anything, it just gets us thinking a little bit about the use of questioning in coaching practice. So firstly, if I can work the slides, there we go. Firstly, a bit of a background to myself. So the reason I've done this, I do think it's relevant. I don't think I'm just, hopefully not just banging on, and it is relevant to give a bit of an understanding of my background. So you can see where my ideas have sort of come from for this book chapter and this webinar. So I've researched in coaching philosophy, also research in other areas, coach behaviour, and I also research in areas like coach education. I'm a lecturer, so my main job is a lecturer at Edge Hill University, which is in a little place in Ormskirk, which isn't too far from Liverpool. Great campus in Ormskirk, and really happy to be working there. I've also been at Wigan Athletic for 15 years in a number of different roles. My role now is mainly a part-time coach within the youth development phase. And then I've more recently become a coach developer for the FA. And I suppose sort of explain these, because these sort of experiences have sort of informed the webinar tonight and then the book chapter early on in terms of my thinking. So it's not just empirical. I suppose that's quite a nice thing around a book chapter. Some of this is anecdotal and come from my experiences and some of my thoughts. And like I said, hopefully we can finish with some questions and discussions at the end of this. So the plan then, looking to explore the myths So I've sort of presented 3 myths in the book chapter, and hopefully going to explore them in a little bit more detail. Look at questioning in detail, look at literature in that area, and do what I call a bit of a deeper dive. So I've sort of got interested now in my research about looking at particular coach behaviours and doing a bit of a deeper dive into each of them and trying to really understand them. Not just for my own benefit, my own coaching. I think it's important to understand these things and what underpins and why we would use these different coach behaviours, but also for the purpose of, I suppose, my job as a researcher and a lecturer and a coach developer. Going to then explore why it is a myth. So again, some of this stuff is empirical. Some of this stuff is, again, my thoughts and around my different backgrounds, but sort of maybe highlight some of why I think it is a myth and why questioning seems to rapidly increased within coaching practice. And then at the end, provide some recommendations, maybe some recommendations that firstly to sort of think about maybe combating some of these myths, but then also some recommendations for questioning. So that's the plan. So first of all, then, exploring the myths. So my view of a myth, I thought it was important to sort of define this at the start. So I see a myth as a widely held but false belief or idea. And in that sense, I suppose the book chapter title isn't really a myth. Hoping not to confuse people too much here, but questioning and coaching, I suppose, does lead to learning. I do believe questioning is a good coach behaviour to use. It's important to use within our coaching in all sorts of contexts and all sorts of domains. But the myths really, where they come from, because questioning is a very good coaching intervention, and it does give opportunity for athletes to learn. But not all questions give athletes the opportunity to learn. And the myths have been identified through my experiences when I've been interviewing and observing coaches in research, talking to coaches in different contexts, but then also thinking about my own questioning when coaching. And the first one, and these aren't verbatim, these aren't what coaches have actually said, but the first one being around questions with learners in coaching practice naturally leads to learning. I think the key word there is sort of naturally. I don't think all types of questions that we use as coaches do actually lead to learning. And we're going to explore these in a little bit more detail as we go on throughout the webinar. The second one that I presented in the book chapter was questions are better than instruction for learning. I do actually think that there's a view out there, obviously not everyone, but there's a view out there with the coaches that I speak to that, you know, questions, we have to use questions for learning to occur in different contexts. And then the final myth that was in the book chapter was this idea of questioning leads to an athlete-centered approach to coaching. I do think it can do, but I also think some of the questioning that is used in practice is more coach-centered than it is athlete-centered. So yeah, some thoughts there, some myths that I've sort of presented in the book chapter, and I'm going to explore a little bit in this webinar. So questioning, I thought it is important to sort of talk about questioning first of all. Questioning has the potential to, and the key word there for me is the potential. It has the potential, and this is more from the educational literature, more so than the sports coaching literature. It sort of highlights what the use of questioning can benefit. So there's an understanding that it can develop an understanding of gameplay. It empowers learners to take ownership of learning, develops problem solving, decision making and creative thinking, and develops reflective thinking and communication skills. So quality questioning, in my views, and from the educational literature, that's suggesting that this can occur. And so questioning has the potential to. If we look at the coach behaviour research, despite the benefits, coaches don't do a lot of it. So yes, there has been an increase, I would say, in coaching practice. I still don't think we do enough of it, seeing that it is an important coach behaviour to use. Coaches communicate how they use a lot of questioning, but then are sometimes surprised when they don't. And it's the same for me in my own practice. So I've watched back at my own coaching videos, and it's not necessarily, I'm not necessarily using a lot of questions. So I look back at the videos, look back at some systematic observation data that gives me some numbers of how many questions I've asked, and it's generally quite low. And that's the same when I've done some research with coaches. Chat to them, interview them, talk about their coaching practice, and they come up about the importance of questioning, but we don't do loads of it compared to the other coach behaviours. But it has increased. I think generally through my observations, you know, as a lecturer, as a coach developer, and in coaching practice, it has increased. But then again, some of the empirical work suggests that also. So generally around coaching, questioning practices increased 2.5% to sort of 13%. Is a bit of a generalization, but generally what we see. However, the problem with that is it's not necessarily the quality, it's more the quantity. One specific study in English youth football, questioning total of them coaches within that environment was 7%, 5% was convergent, and 2%, but only 2% was divergent questioning, so asking a lot more closed questions than open questions. And similar findings have been seen in the US in empirical research in sports like hockey, basketball, and volleyball. So I think what message I'm trying to give here is that it has increased, but not necessarily the quality of questioning has increased. And also, again, the educational literature has done a lot more research in this area around questioning, but research suggests that teachers are not very good at asking questions which promote learning. So moving on, so some of the things around some of my reflections, I suppose, on my own coaching videos and watching myself back coaching, but then also through other coaches, through observations of videos and live observations. These are some of the things I see when people ask questions. One of the things is not giving players or athletes or learners time to think. So we'd ask a question and we quickly give a response or to sort of answer the questions for them. Also, what I see when we do sort of look at questioning in detail is that generally the coach talks more, and as we talk about a little bit later on in the recommendations, an important part of questioning is actually listening as well. But again, we don't see too much of that. And this is, you know, some generalization. Obviously, there's a lot of great coaching practices out there, but these are some of the things that I've seen as we move through. And it's very much coach-led, the use of questioning. It's more the coach driving the conversations and the questioning that is done, not necessarily the players or the learners within the session. And then the other one, a little bit separate, is that I've seen this in my own practice as well, actually asking questions why people are still playing or working, and not necessarily ideal, overloading the working memory. So again, we'll provide some recommendations at the M4 questioning, but a lot of what I see, yes, there's been an increase in questioning, but not necessarily the quality of it. Okay, so now I'm going to try and unpick why these myths occur. And again, this isn't necessarily empirical. These are just some of my thoughts, and it'd be interesting to know your thoughts as well, why questioning has become so popular. So first of all, questioning, I believe, has become more popular because organised stressing the importance of using them. So I do think big organisations have now said, as coaches, we need to be using questioning, but not necessarily getting in the detail of what is quality questioning or how do we do it effectively. It's like we should just be answering more questions. And a colleague of mine, Chris Cushion, who's also my PhD supervisor, uses this phrase quite a lot, not about questioning, but about other things. And I think this is true to questioning as well, around let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. I do feel like we've thrown other coach behaviours like instruction, certainly around instructional pedagogy and direct instruction, have sort of gone as like things that we shouldn't be doing anymore. And that's dangerous and problematic. And this case of jumping across, and we should be using more questionings or only questioning. Being a bit dramatic there, but that's something that I sort of feel and see within the practices that I'm involved in. Questioning seems to be employed because of other coaches value this behaviour. So not only organisations, but people in hierarchical positions value the use of questioning and stress the importance of using it and use it themselves. So other coaches feel like they have to. And this was something, you know, I found in my PhD that I did, not about questioning, but about coaching philosophy. Coaching philosophy was definitely a buzzword in the organisations where I was doing my research. It was something used quite often, and some of the reasons the reasons for that was because people in hierarchical positions were using it, people in positions of authority, even the media heard it a lot on Match of the Day and things like that. And therefore people just seemed to think it was an important thing to use. When I tried to unpick it a little bit further, coaching philosophy lent more to like tactical knowledge instead of actually anything to do with coaching or philosophy, which I thought was quite interesting. So I think similar sense, the way coaching philosophy has become quite a buzz term to use. I think questioning has become quite vogue and popular as well. So moving on, so around this idea of power and credible, knowledge and decisive people, influence within what is said and how coaching practice is delivered. Therefore, you know, because of this is expected in the role of coaching. So coaches are now expected to ask questions. So I suppose a question really, has questioning become a traditional coach behaviour? Is it now traditional coaching to use questions? Are we socialised into using it? Just a question really, and just a thought that I had. And the reason I say that as well is because of the lack of quality in practice possibly shows this. So we're certainly asking more questions, but we're not necessarily asking quality questions. And some of the questioning clips I've looked at as well, sometimes we might as well just tell them. There's no need for the question. If we ask a question, don't give them time to think, and we answer them for it, and it's a rhetorical question, why are we using it? It might be just quicker to give a clear and concise instruction. But anyway, my thoughts there. Some other thoughts around sort of this notion of questioning. So separations in coaching between instruction and questioning, other ones like games and drills, I think is unhelpful. I don't know why we do it, but we seem to separate these things as the good and the bad. And I'm not sure that's always useful. I believe one way of coaching or this golden bullet doesn't necessarily exist. If someone did, someone would be very, very rich, I'm sure. But as far as I'm aware, you know, there's not just one way of coaching. There's not just this one golden bullet that we can use in every situation. I just don't think it exists personally. It would be interesting to know other people's thoughts. Positioning, questioning has always been a better sort of coach behaviour than another, therefore is problematic. I feel it's important to use a broad range of coach behaviours. So things like instruction, feedback, range of different types of feedback, silence, etc., is important, and choose the most appropriate intervention depending on the specific situation, considering the task that needs to be undertaken. The learner is obviously quite important to consider, and the environment you're in. But then on top of that, also yourself, what are you good at? So I think there's loads more things to consider. It's a lot more sort of difficult than just saying we need to be asking more questions, or there's one way of doing it. And I quite like this. So colleague Ed Cope uses these pictures before. Sorry if you've seen these before, and he talks about this. And I think it's quite a nice way of thinking about coaching. Is that on the right there, you'll see the cook doing the fish and chips, and then the chef on the other side. And I think as coaching, it's better to be more of a chef. And the reason I say that, the way I see cooks there, although that fish and chips look very, very good, the sort of discipline in one way of doing things. They're very good at that one thing. And for me, I think sports coaches need to have a variety of different ways, of different methods, different recipes, if you like, and then being able to apply it at the right time, in the right situation. For me, that's more effective. Okay, so I sort of split up recommendations into two sort of slides. One around focusing more around combating these myths, I suppose, that are out there. But then also I thought it'd be important to sort of, I've talked about questioning, talked about quality questioning, but then actually give some recommendations what I think that is informed by the literature. So first of all, understanding the why we coach the way we do, I think is really important. Again, from a PhD sort of research and other sort of empirical stuff I've done, again, not specifically linking to questioning, but I think we sort of, instead of giving a clear rationale, so a reason why we do what we do, it's more of an afterthought and more of a rationalization. So personally in coaching, when I speak to coaches, it's more of an afterthought. I did this because of this. I actually think if we think more like for a rationalization, like a rationale for coaching or a rationale of our coaching, that'd be more useful than actually having an afterthought. So understand the why we coach the way we do. Also about increasing awareness is important. As coaches, we are known as having quite poor self-awareness of what we do in our practice. And I certainly have that when I look back through my videos and I'm shaking my head about some of the things I'm doing. But awareness can improve, it can get better. And we sort of showed that in an empirical study with colleagues Chris Cushion, Ed Cope and Stephen Harvey, where we actually used across 5 football coaches over 3 football seasons, or a longitudinal study. We used video, systematic observation, data, and reflective conversations with mediated other to increase awareness and change coach behaviour, change what coaches were doing. So I believe it can be done. I believe we can increase awareness, and will be something quite important to do in our practice, and allow us to recognise our use of questioning and why we're doing it. Sort of mentioned this already, but just wanted to highlight the point again, really, that the coach behaviour implement, for me, should be decided on the need of the learner. That's probably the utmost and most important. The specific topic being undertaken, but then also the environment we are situated in. I think it's important to consider the environment and the structural influences, if you like, that affect us. Not saying that we roll over and accommodate them, but we're aware of them, and maybe sometimes we need to battle against them. I'm also quite keen, and this might be just because of the job as a lecturer, but I'm really keen on making evidence-informed decisions, not just because it become popular or certain individual or organisation tells us to do it. We're actually basing things on the evidence, and we can make some informed decisions based on the evidence that's out there. And there is evidence out there. There is stuff in other stuff around questioning, feedback, instruction, and we can use that as coaches and then really understand why we do what we do. But then also, I think it's important to filter that, so filter knowledge and then make that informed decision based on, like I said earlier, the learner, the topic, and the environment. Okay, in terms of recommendations for questioning then, so I suppose I can't keep banging on about quality questioning without giving some recommendations from the literature. So first of all, asking divergent questions, so more open questions than convergent and closed question. And divergent questions, literature suggests that requires learners to critically think about their answer. But a part of that, I think it's important to give people time to think. So like I mentioned earlier, certainly watching my own coaching practice as well, is that sometimes we ask a question and we don't necessarily give our learners time to think about the answer that they want to give or engage in any discussion or conversation. Sometimes it can be a rhetorical question that we answer for them, which is practically, in my view, useless. We might as well just tell them. So yeah, thinking requires time, and something I've worked on over, many years, and in terms of my coaching. When I ask a question, before I ask it, I'll let the learners or the player, in my case, let them know that, I want you to think about this. You've got some time here to think. I don't just want you to blurt out the answer. Chat amongst yourselves if you want to as well. Let's have a think. Let's have a discussion around what some of the answers could be. And sometimes they come out with some, better things that you could have ever thought about, and thinking about things differently. So I think time's really, really important. And actually, once it's about educating the people you're working with as well. Once they know they've got time, they don't just blurt out the answers. They think a little bit more about that. Individualized learning as well, by asking questions to individuals or small groups rather than the whole group. Deliberately plan questions, or something I've started to do in I've been doing for a while in my coaching, I suppose, is that, yes, on the session, I'll have the session plan, but then I have a little piece of card in my pocket as well. And on yes, I do have a bit of the X's and O's, but I have some of the, like the coaching points, some of the things I'm going after in the session. But then also I'll plan questions on there that I try to make divergent, that I try and make sometimes specific to individuals if needed, or I certainly try and link to sort of the coaching points or learning outcomes. And I would use that in my session. I pull that out when I'm observing, silent on task, and thinking about the intervention I'm going to use. Actually, pulling that piece of card out and having that question ready to go has helped me. I do think questioning is a skill. I do think it's something not necessarily really easy to do as coaches. More we practice it, the better we'll get at it. But I do think deliberately planning questions can help. And then this is somewhere where this research around questioning is moving to. For me and colleague Ed Cope, we're looking at creating opportunity for dialogue. So dialogue can increase relationships. It gives a chance for learners to explicitly evaluate their thinking and build on existing ideas, and greater inclusivity and a buy-in as well. So yeah, dialogue is something that we're thinking about now, moving forward in this area of research and creating conversations, if that makes sense. And I think that's about it, really. Yeah, thank you for listening. 25 minutes, Amy.
I
hope that's all right.
Yeah, no, that was great. And you said you were going to be 25. Normally the rule is someone tells me they'll be 25 and they're 55. So I appreciate that, Mark. Thanks so much. Mark, we've had some questions in the chat, and I asked coaches to talk about whether they do use questioning in their practice. One of the questions I've got, and I hope you don't mind me asking this, but you talked about, and I really like the idea of, divergent versus convergent questions. Can you give us some examples of divergent questions that you've used in your coaching practice and how that kind of opens dialogue?
Yeah, good question. So I suppose that's a good example of a divergent question, Amy, that you just asked me. So yeah, just I suppose more open questions, that there's more than just one or two responses. There's multiple responses that can be given. So I suppose in the sport of football, I don't know, show me a good way of, or tell me how you could pass that ball from A to B, or you put me on the spot here. This is why I plan questions. Thinking about things like that. So tell me how you can cushion the ball more effectively. Where could your first touch go? What do you think about when you're dribbling? What are some of the technical points you're thinking about? So things like that, really, I suppose, more open questions than closed. And I'm not saying always should be divergent questions, but I think we should be asking more divergent than convergent.
Yeah.
There is a place sometimes that there's a coach in the context where I coach, and the question isn't for learning purposes, but they'll say yes, no. as in like a convergent question to sit and make sure that they're listening. So
Yeah.
there's another reason why they might ask it. There's another purpose for it.
Yeah.
But I think for the learning purposes, then yeah, the more divergent questions we ask, the better.
Yeah, great. And I've had a few questions around like questions, and then like, is there more appropriate questioning for different age groups? Do you have an opinion on that, Mark?
So yeah, that's I'm coaching my daughter's under sevens grassroots team in the sport of football, and that's completely opened my eyes in some of the stuff that we do. I ask some divergent questions there, and some of the answers I get back are yeah, very interesting. So I think it depends. I think sometimes we force the issue of question, or we ask questions when sometimes they might not know the answer, but then we just keep going, we keep asking questions and questions, and they don't actually know. And I suppose we know we hopefully get to know our learners, players, athletes, whatever we want to call them. And we'll know at times when actually they just need telling. Direct instruction is a good method to use. It's quick. It's a good way for people to learn. We can tell them quickly and they'll know it.
Yeah.
So yeah, with the younger age groups, possibly, you might be using more instruction possibly, but yeah.
Thanks. And then someone's asked a really good question, Zachary. How do you respond when you ask many questions as a coach, but many times there is no response from the team?
Yeah, good point. Well, I suppose you could try and rephrase the question. You could do some other things, but I won't force the issue. Just tell them if they don't know. If you're not getting answers back to the questions, they probably don't know the answer, so probably need telling. I suppose that's the same response as the question before, but yeah, it's not, for me, questioning is a skill. It's not something easy to do. So yeah.
Yeah. And Andrew asks, do you think cold calling works with players to keep them fully engaged?
Go on, what do you mean by cold calling?
If you want to take yourself, if you want to
sure.
screen share, and I'll see if Andrew will kindly jump in and ask his question.
Hi, Mark. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yeah. Hi. Are you okay, Andrew?
Yeah. Thanks very much for this evening. It's been great. So in terms of the cold calling part, it's about, instead of like singling one person out to ask them a question, you ask the question first, then you ask the player's name, just to make sure that they're all understanding the same question.
Right, nice. Okay. So then you'd ask a multiple number of people, would you then, I guess? Or say a couple of names?
Yeah, I think it's just
understood.
Yeah, just so that they all are fully engaged initially, then you direct the question at somebody specifically. I think I've read a little bit about it, where you say somebody's name first and then the other players probably tend to switch off because they know that question is going to be directed at an individual rather than a group.
Yeah, no, I like that. I don't necessarily have anything to respond to that, but yeah I think that's a great way to add to the practice. We should add that to the recommendation slide, shouldn't we, at the end? I'll make sure I reference you as well.
Yeah, thank you.
Tag, you've got some good questions in the chat. I don't know if you want to jump on and ask.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
No, just I find it very interesting, sort of the approach to maybe introducing skill development or skill acquisition in terms of how questions might set the environment versus doing a demonstration first. Would Mark have any recommendations on that?
Good question. So I use both in my coaching. I use demos and questioning, if that's what we mean. I suppose it's good to ask questions to check people's prior experiences and knowledge and understanding first. So that might be why I use questions first, but then I also use demos, not necessarily demos to it is modeling, but not necessarily to say copy me, this is the way to do it. If you've seen me play football, then you wouldn't copy anything I do demonstration wise, but the demo might show a link, or I might get someone else to do a demonstration. And it's not necessarily this is the way of doing it, but it allows sort of a visual representation and some modeling with that. And I suppose we could use the two together, the demonstrations and questions. We could provide a demo and then ask some questions about it. Don't know if that answers your question, but
Yeah, thank you very much. I think what you're saying is it's in context, maybe.
yeah. I think that's the point I tried to make at the end. I suppose them things around the learner and the environment and the particular task that you're doing. It does depend on that. I'm not one to say that there's one way for everything, not one size fits all. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Doug. Mark, I think we spoke about this before we came onto the session. I've noticed there was kind of a wave of or a fashion within coach education around questioning, and we must use questioning. And then do you think there can be an overemphasis on some type of coaching behaviours that we kind of get a bit obsessed with?
Yeah, certainly. We seem to, some become, favourites and buzz terms, and coach behaviours are the same in that sense that they become popular, don't they?
Mm-hmm.
I do think we're going to end up going full circle. I do think we'll end up going back to instruction at some point. I don't know. We seem to have come from instruction to questioning. But I don't know if we're quite there with questioning, but I've put out there, I suppose I put on the slides that, I see it as now a traditional behaviour, something that's socialised and used. I do wonder whether we'll go back round to something else. So I think they do become buzz terms. I can see Noel Dempsey's on the call as well. He's done some research in that area around, policy and how that informs practice. There's some stuff in that I find really useful when thinking about these things as well.
I won't put Noel on the spot.
Sorry, Noel. I've seen Ian Stonebridge on the call as well. So congratulations, Ian, on getting your PhD.
Ian's just asked a question, actually, Mark. Ian, I don't know if you want to ask the question directly to Mark.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. That's great. Brilliant stuff around questioning. It's obviously really interesting, and as you know, my background, we've done work on that as well. So, without giving too much away, I promise I'm not trying to pinch the idea. What are your early thoughts around this idea of generating dialogue as opposed to just focusing on questioning then?
Yeah. So again, with Edu, Ian, obviously, we're looking at pushing it forward now around questioning and looking at the dialogic pedagogy. So moving more from, questions that are divergent, we're saying they're effective. And they could be seen as more like a one-off, like one question and then it stops. And we feel as coaches, we stop the intervention, we get out. But actually now we're looking at this, like actually building more conversations and more to and froing. And as you're aware, time always seems to be the excuse, doesn't it? We need to get out and we need to get and practicing, but sometimes actually it might be time well spent having a discussion and chatting through these different ideas and solutions. So that's where we're sort of going with it. It's still early stages. We've got some videos, we've done some analysis, and just currently trying to write something up in that area.
Great stuff. Yeah, sounds good.
Thanks, Ian. We've got a question from Ben about, do you observe the impacts of questioning through player behaviours? Ben, I don't know if you want to jump in and kind of elaborate on that question.
Yeah, I was just interested there when you're talking about when you review the video footage of your sessions. Is there anything that you do in terms of observation of player behaviours? So not just like the verbal response to a question, but is there any way of measuring the impact?
Yeah, so I suppose it is a bit of a limitation of the research I've done in the past. I probably do need to involve players more so. For my own educational purposes, I suppose I'll ask players, and I have done that before. And part of this is, getting feedback on them on the use of questioning, different types of questioning. We're quite good at where I work doing that, getting feedback from players. I suppose looking at the videos as well, looking at what the responses are. We'll do that, but I don't necessarily code it or systematically observe players or responses. But we'll look at them. Yeah, we'll certainly look at them. I think from my experience, as well from coaching is, like I said before, a lot of this was educating the players as well, that, you know, I don't want you to give me it's not the case of who can give the answer the quickest is the best. It's not that, you know. I'm not necessarily sure that's always shows learning as well. So it's a case of, you know, educating them and getting them into building more discussion based, I suppose, and giving them time to think and creating discussions amongst themselves. And I think that's where, yeah, some of the more positive stuff has come from. So yeah, I have rambled on there a little bit, but I suppose the limitation is no systematical observing or anything like that. A player's response is no, but certainly watch back what they do in videos and how they respond. Good question.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ben.
Tom's mentioned here, should the coach behaviour be called question and answer? So Tom, would you mind elaborating on that? Tom Causey.
Hi, Amy. Hi, Mark. Yeah, no, it just occurred to me that you're talking about creating a dialogue and finding out what the athlete is thinking about. Then, you know, quite often this is called questioning, or even going back a few years where it's called effective questioning. So you could actually argue that some questions are ineffective based on what you're talking about. But yeah, it just seems to me that actually you can call it question and answer might be a more fitting description of what we're actually trying to do here.
Yeah, possibly, yeah. But sometimes they can answer a closed question or a more convergent question. They can just say yes or no. So I think it's a bit more than that. But yeah, I can see what you're getting at, certainly. I think with the dialogic stuff as well, it's not just question then an answer. It's, you know, turning it more into like a conversation. So asking questions and talking about it in that way. Yeah. Well, yeah, fair point, Tom. Yeah, good point.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks, Mark. Question from me, and well, one question to the room, and some people have already provided some examples when they've used questioning. I'd love if any coaches would be happy to share their kind of examples of how they've used questioning. But while people are thinking about that, Mark, question for you, is there any times when you've used questioning and it's just not gone well, or you've not got the result that you wanted?
Yeah, well, yeah, I have seen at times when people, and myself as well, I suppose, you know, in the past, when I first started sort of coaching, I did move into like questioning was, you know, I have to ask questions. I fell into that trap, and I would force questions and ask questions constantly. And sometimes, you know, players would look at you like, I don't know, but you'd carry on asking more questions to try and find out. So yeah, I've certainly fallen into that trap, where really I should have recognised earlier they don't know and I need to tell them. So yeah, I suppose it's that as well. But flipping it on the head, I've seen, or in the past, I've worked with, this was more at the performance end, working Paralympic sport, a goalball, and I've asked questions with them athletes, and it's just been taken away. It's, you know, it's session, you know, paused. This is something really important to discuss, and they've led it. They've just gone away with the conversations, and to be honest, I've not done too much there, but that they were really valuable times, letting them talk and conversation, actually, you know, pausing the actual practice and letting them talk, because they're making some really valid and really important points. Yeah. So I suppose flipping it on the head a little bit, the question. Yeah, nice examples. Thanks, Mark. Any brave coaches in the room got any examples to share? Go on, Tag, you can jump in on this one. You've put something in the chat.
Yeah, I just find that the longer, the better the relationship I have with the player or with the group, that they understand more where I'm coming from with the questions and what the purpose of the questions are. And I find it easier and easier as I understand them to interpret their responses and to put it into some sort of a practical action or drill or whatever.
Yeah, good point. And with that, obviously, you knowing your players, athletes, whoever they are, the learners, does allow you to do that. But I think sometimes as coaches, we misinterpret what they say as well. And I've done it before where I've asked a question, I thought they've understood, I thought I've understood the response, and then we've carried on the conversation. It's led somewhere where that's not what they actually meant. And we've just asked a one-off question and just a response, then sometimes we can get, blurred lines a little bit. We can get confused. So I think, it's a good point.
Yeah, thanks for that. Noel Dempsey, you've put a good point in the chat. Please will you share that with the rest of the group?
Yeah,
No,
put him on the spot.
it's no, I had to think about this one. And it's something I've literally used in the last few weeks, and it actually surprised me how, I guess, well it went, and it had nothing to do with me. It had everything to do with the players, and obviously, like Mark, my context is football, and I'm moving away from the question to receive an answer, and I'm trying to use questions more to get them to show me.
Okay.
Because in the context of football, it doesn't really matter what I always say to them. It doesn't really matter what you tell me. You can tell me everything, but you're not getting an A on a piece of paper. You've got to be able to demonstrate. So I've offered them kind of scenarios, and I've said to them since Christmas, look, I'm going to pose you a question, once a week. And the question that I posed a couple of weeks ago was, look, how would you like to build out from the back, or how would you like to get into the attacking half? What's going to work for you? And they get to, I guess, come up with the answer amongst themselves, but ultimately they have to show me. And I guess I just then break that into further questions of, okay, who's doing what role? What does the role look like? What area of the pitch are you playing into? Why are you playing there? And it's just getting them to, I guess, think, more than what the initial question is.
Yeah.
And I think it's worked better just because of their game understanding, and then I get to gauge where their game understanding is. And you get to go, yeah, do you know what? So-and-so is a really good thinker on the pitch. And actually, I might need to work a little bit more with somebody else who actually just sees straight line. I'm just going to run in that line. And then you get to kind of individualize that coaching within a session, because actually they're catering the whole session. So I've tried to move away from that Q&A approach to more let the question shape what the session or the sessions are going to be. So yeah, that was kind of something that I've been used to doing, because I think, like you, Mark, you get to a point of going, why am I even asking some of these questions? Like, I should have just told them. Like, I've asked this question almost out of courtesy, and I spent a long time doing that. So yeah, I've just tried to reshape what a question is.
No, I like that. No, I think that's really good. Yeah. So I suppose the utopia of that is them showing you and possibly articulating as well, or articulating and understanding, but then also showing it into practice. Yeah.
Yeah, so I give them the whiteboard, and they basically note down, or they show arrows, and they give an indication of why they're doing what they're doing. And it might not be actualized. They might not be able to do it at the moment. And that's maybe where I step in. And like you say, you might offer some direct instruction. You might show them a demo, but it's on the proviso of what they're thinking about. And it will come over weeks, I hope.
Very good.
So yeah, that was my example.
Thanks, Noel. That was great. Tom mentions here, is the common question asked at the end of the session, what did you learn today?
Yeah, I suppose that's a generic one, isn't it? That's sort of asked. Yeah, I suppose sometimes divergent questions as well. It's not going too open, if that makes sense. Giving them some direction. It's why I think it's quite tricky questioning. It's like, yeah, on one hand, I'm not saying like closed questions, convergent questions, although there's a place for them at time, and then it's sometimes open it too much, too wide. It's having that things, but that's where the planning of questioning, I think, comes in useful. So you could plan your debrief, your questions that are in there, and that could be one.
Yeah.
Maybe linked to the specific topic or the coaching points.
Yeah. Jen's provided a really nice example. Jen, do you mind jumping off mute and sharing that with us?
Yeah, absolutely. I work in a swimming context, and I try to use questioning after a race with my athletes on a one-to-one basis. And I'll often start with, how was that? Or how did that feel? To try and start that reflection process. Obviously, it's difficult with swimmers because the first thing they do is look at the time, and then that immediately changes any thoughts or feelings they had. But then try and like lead off and like build off those questions. So, oh, if you felt like this, why might that have happened? Or why did you feel like that? I do get concerned at points that I might be a bit too leading. I wasn't sure what your kind of thoughts or what the research had been around maybe the use of leading questions. Is it appropriate at all levels, or?
Yeah, I don't know really from a research perspective. I suppose leading questions would turn away, would be different to what we're trying to do with questioning, would it? I suppose if we're trying to lead them to an answer, we're not really getting them to think, are we? Or we're not really getting their understanding, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
I think we have to be careful with leading questions, don't we? But it's tough, isn't it? But I do like them questions that you put in there in the chat. How was that? How did that feel? Yeah.
thanks,
For the
Mark.
right situation, appropriate. Yeah.
Jen, can I just ask what kind of leading questions might you ask?
It's hard to think of an example off the top of my head. I just know that when I've been working with coach developers or mentors, they mention that I can be quite leading.
Mm-hmm.
And I think sometimes it's kind of almost what I said earlier when I started a question and I said, oh, do you think this or this? Where the question starts to become a little bit more convergent and less options available.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I guess even questions like, did you enjoy that session? You then inferring that they must enjoy it, if that makes sense. So rather than did you enjoy it, is how was it? That would, I mean, we could get into the intricacies of wording and types of questions all night. But yeah, no, it's a great point. Thanks for asking and sharing that. Okay, I'm just conscious of time. Jeff, would you jump in and give us your final thoughts? And I've seen you've commented a few times and give a few examples. Would you like to finish off the session?
Oh, cheers! Thanks a million. Yeah, it's trying to make, like, I'm coaching under 12 boys football in Ireland, and it's trying to make decision makers of them, to understand, like, to see what they saw, because when you're on the sideline, you don't see exactly the scenario where what they see, because you're not in their eyes. So it's trying to make them choose. Why did you make that decision? Is there another option there that you could possibly choose? That's kind of what I'd be kind of. So for the future, they can kind of understand where I'm coming from as a coach, because I can't see it. Does that make any sense for going forward? You know, that's kind of the question I'd be asking. Is that relevant for that age group going forward for making them better players at 16, 17 years of age?
What do you think, Mark?
Go on then. Sorry. Repeat the question again. Sorry.
So I'm asking them questions along the lines of why did you make that pass and not?
Yeah.
Why did you make pass A instead of pass B? What did you see in pass A as opposed to what I would see from, again, I'm in my 40s, so you kind of have that kind of life experience of seeing other things that they don't see. So it's trying to ask that question of, are they relevant questions of that age group, or is it too much to ask a child of that age? That kind of a question.
Yeah, I suppose it's a massive cop-out, but it does depend, doesn't it? It does depend who they are. Like you say, you'll know your learners best. That might be the appropriate question at that point.
Right.
So yeah, I've used that type of questioning before, and it's worked well enough, I think. But yeah, again, for me, it all depends on who you're working with. That I do really think that's important. Like, who the learner, what's the environment you're in. You as a coach as well. What's your preferences, and then what's the specific task? What's the topic we're trying to trying to do.
Okay.
And then making an informed decision on that. But yeah, I can't see why that wouldn't work.
Yeah.
But you know, you learn as best. Yeah.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks, Amelia, for the
Thanks,
Zoom.
Jeff. And I think it depends like on the response you get, and then you gauge from there, don't you?
Yeah. True.
Last question from, sorry, Greg. Well, Jeff has actually followed up. Greg's followed up on Jeff's point, but last question from Ross. Mark, have you any advice on dealing with responses you think are incorrect when trying to coach a certain element of the game?
Yeah, hi Ross. Yeah, I suppose tell them. Well, from you can say from your perspective, I don't think that's correct, and I suppose that's the job of the coach, isn't it? To be fair, I suppose we're not always going to be the knowledgeable other, but I suppose that is our job. That's, you know, in coaching, we are expected to have knowledge of the sport and an understanding. So yeah, if I have had an incorrect answer, I have told them. But again, in the past, I suppose I've fallen in the trap of, you know, sometimes you get an incorrect answer, don't you? And you just sort of ignore it and move on to something else, or you just sort of crack on, or you just listen to every answer. But I think sometimes this is where the dialogic stuff comes in. You can, I suppose our job is to challenge, probe, you know what I mean? And maybe we've misinterpreted it as well. Maybe they are right and we're seeing it a little bit differently. But yeah, no, good point, Ross.
Yeah,
I suppose it's just trying not to make answering a question off-putting is sometimes the hard bit, isn't it? That if you are too blunt in terms of saying that's incorrect or that's not how I see it, do you make answering a question something that isn't enticing for the athletes? It's one of the hard bits of questioning in my experience anyway. Thanks, Mark.
No, I agree. See you tomorrow, Ross.
See you then.
And without going off onto a completely different topic area entirely, this is actually myths too. But I think that comes down to how safe the athlete feels in that environment. So if we look at kind of psychological safety and how, and it's like the wider context of the athlete and the relationship with the coach and the environment, I think being able to correct them is, it depends on that massively. Okay, we'll call it there. We're bang on 8 o'clock, and I am a bit like precious about keeping to time. So just want to say a big thank you, Mark, for contributing your time tonight, for contributing the chapter. And I know it has given a lot of people food for thought. We've had some great feedback from Twitter and for people getting in touch to say that this has been a really useful and practical chapter for coaches to be able to take like into their coaching practice. So for me, one of the kind of take-home messages are, you know, there are different types of questioning. So do think about the types of questions that we ask. And be conscious of that. Be conscious of kind of how we plan for questioning, and do we plan our questioning before a session? And then yeah, just the last point there. Think about how safe do our athletes feel to answer questions, and how are we creating that environment for them. So yeah, thanks everyone for contributing. Thanks to the coaches that have come on and given their examples. We will be running the next Myths webinar on the 22nd of Feb. Do look out for kind of Twitter advert, and if you are part of the Eventbrite mailing list, you'll get a notification as soon as we set up that event on the 22nd. And that will be the myth around fundamental movement skills with James Rudd and colleagues. So thanks again, Mark. Just a quick one. Are you happy for people to get in touch with you via email or Twitter if they've got any further questions?
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, let's keep the discussions going. Thank you for everyone who's engaged tonight. Thank you.
If anyone did come late, we did record the start of Mark's session, so that will be on YouTube. And Vinny has left a very, as usual, excellent reflection for us all in the chat there. So have a great night, everyone. Mark, if you want to just stay on for a minute.